Good morning, everyone. I have a study here today on the entertainment media. The title of today's sermon is The Entertainment Media, subtitle Satanic Boot Camp, which I chose specifically, and I'll show you why I chose that subtitle later. Excuse me. Thank you. My purpose here is not to focus on the good of the entertainment media. We all know there is good to entertainment that we use. It's good in the fact that it entertains us. We use it for something beneficial, and we certainly are not blind to that. That's the very easy thing to see. What we need to be very aware of is what evil there is, because in the evil lies the danger. And that is what we have to combat. And today what I'm going to be doing is giving you I'm going to try to give you some insight on some very interesting and very scary satanic propaganda, satanic strategies, which are rampant in the entertainment media. And when I'm talking of entertainment media today, I'm not talking of news media. I'm talking about movies and videos and television and music, books even, the sort of thing that all of us enjoy. Every single one of us uses. Today I'm centering on us, not the evil that the world does, no. I'm trying to apply this to us, to myself. When I started this study, I took two passages of Scripture, 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5, and then Galatians 5, 19 through 21. That'd be the character of the end times and the works of the flesh. And what I did with those is I basically took every single one of those abominations which is delineated therein, and I expounded on exactly how just about every single one of them is applied to the media. But that was extremely tedious. Extremely long. So what I did is I kind of condensed it all down. I'm going to focus on some of the more major basic points. Let's go ahead and let's just start by reading those two passages just to familiarize ourselves. Start in Galatians 5, 19 through 21. Galatians 5, 19 through 21. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revellings, and such like. Of the which I tell you before, as I have told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. And then 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5. 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5. Starting in verse 1, really. This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful and holy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. So again, I'm not going to go tediously over every single one of those. What I'm going to do is focus on some of the more particular strategic evils Satan has used, and hopefully I can give you a new perspective on what you entertain yourself with. And also, if it looks like I am reading my way through this, that's probably because I am, because this is not an outline. I did not put this in outline form. So I have a lot I want to say, and I wrote down a lot of what I want to say, and I might just spend some time reading. Might take a moment to find where I am, because it's harder to follow a document than it is to follow an outline. Okay. Excuse me. So we're going to start off by looking at how how pride and selfishness apply to the media. I'm going to just kind of jump right into this. Hopefully you guys can follow me. I have a lot to say today and not so much time to say it in. So I'm just going to plunge into this and hopefully you get a lot out of it. The pride and selfishness of the media. In Timothy it mentioned, 2 Timothy 3, it mentioned proud and high-minded and boasters. Proud means having or displaying excessive self-esteem. High-minded, it means lofty. Boasters, boasting, it means to puff oneself up in speech, to speak vaingloriously. What this is telling us, these definitions of pride, pride is the putting of oneself in places he should not be. Inordinate self-esteem, inordinate self-esteem. That's what pride is. Inordinate means exceeding reasonable limits and out of place. High-minded is the same. It's loftiness, a sense of height. High-minded, your mind is high. Loftiness, you are lofted up. Let's look at some verses that'll put these two together. 2 Chronicles 32. 2 Chronicles 32, verses 25 through 26. This is speaking of Hezekiah when he let his pride bring him down. Verses 25 through 26. But Hezekiah rendered not again according to the benefit done unto him, for his heart was, look, lifted up. His heart was lifted up. Therefore there was wrath upon him and upon Judah and Jerusalem. Notwithstanding, Hezekiah humbled himself for the pride of his heart. He had pride in his heart, and his heart was lifted up. Pride makes you feel bigger. It puffs you up. It makes you feel like your hand is longer, as though you can reach things that you really can't. It's a deception. And we can find that in Jeremiah 49:16. Jeremiah 49:16. This is speaking of the country of Ammon, a prideful country indeed. Thy terribleness hath deceived thee, and the pride of thine heart. The pride of their heart deceived them. They thought they were bigger than they really were. That's what pride is. It puffs you up. It makes you feel stronger. It makes you feel as though you have more privilege, more circumstance. But in reality, that's a deception, and you don't. And then add that to boasting. Boasting, it's prideful speech. Again, it's the puffing up of oneself in speech. Puffing up. It's all about making yourself bigger, making yourself feel as though you have more circumstance, more privilege, more power. But in reality, you don't. Now, do you think that this might possibly apply to the media? Do you think there might be pride? Do you think actors, do you think characters that we see, are they overly humble most of the time? Are actors overly humble? No. No, I don't think so. All you have to do is watch a movie premiere. I've seen videos of I can think of one in particular, a movie premiere where the actors were walking down that red carpet, and the pride and the self-esteem, it just exuded from the sight in the most gaggable way. It was so intense. It was horrible. The pride of the media is extremely excessive. Or note the pride and the loftiness of music celebrities. The character of music itself, the pop music, modern music, it's self-centered, it's conceited, it's egotistical, it's self-indulgent. These are all synonyms of pride. And then the musicians themselves, look at the way they act when they're performing. That in your face, let my face completely take up the whole of the camera. Let me eat the microphone while I am at it. And this sort of thing, it transfers very easily to audience. Again, the important characteristic of pride is that it puffs one up. And when one looks at someone who is proud, someone who is smaller feels smaller. And pride can intimidate other people because they feel smaller. They feel less powerful. And for an audience, someone who delves into media constantly sees this, do you think this might not have an effect on them? It certainly can. It's very dangerous, because that's the way we work. When we see bigger things, we feel smaller. Not that that always matters, but it happens. And then the audience, an audience that sees that, they can begin to want to be bigger. They can begin to want to feel stronger. So then they begin to adopt the pride that they see. They begin to adopt it, and that's the transfer of the pride you see. Pride started in, let's take it, the media, that's my example at the moment, and suddenly it transferred to someone else, the audience. It's not, you don't even notice it all the time. It's subconscious sometimes. A subconscious realization that one who is proud seems bigger, and you who are not proud yet feel smaller. And pride is so excessive in the media, this is very easily done. Okay, moving on. Covetousness and envy. Covetousness is in the Timothy reference, envy in Galatians. Inordinate jealousy, that's what covetousness is, and envy. Inordinate jealousy, where you see something you want, and you can't have it, but you want it anyway, and you're going to try whatever you can get, try whatever you can do to get it. Covetousness, envy. Covetousness actually leads to lust. Really, they're synonyms of a type. Covetousness is the lust of what someone else has. Excuse me. Allergies. So let's look at two important points here. How pride can factor into covetousness. Pride, the pride of the media, it gives it a false sense of height. I was showing you that. It's a false sense of height, a false sense of power. This is height and power one ought not to have, but many want it anyway, which is basically coveting and lusting after and envying what you ought not have. A sense of height, which is inordinate. And further, when you're indulging in false height, when you are indulging in pride, it makes you feel bigger. It makes you feel like your arm is longer. It makes you feel like you can reach things, but you really can't. And you can begin to lust after things you shouldn't. And covet after things which you shouldn't. 2, there's a very important characteristic of entertainment media, any entertainment really, especially something like television. Everything you see is idealistic. Everything is more comfortable. Everything is more luxurious than in real life. Heroes are stronger than they really would be, more powerful, more amazing. Men are more handsome, women are more beautiful, and believe me, they are, because I've seen actresses out of makeup, and I had to look twice before I recognized it. They suddenly looked like very normal, plain women out of makeup. But no, once they become actors, once they are in that prideful esteem of the media, that idealism, suddenly it's unrealistic, and they're more beautiful than they really would be. Men are more handsome. Everything in the entertainment media, it all works out to the satisfaction of the audience, which is important because if it does not satisfy us, why would we entertain ourselves with it? It works to the satisfaction of the audience. It's all ideal. But the problem is, this is a fallen world we live in. Everything is not ideal. And where am I? I warned you. It's all very idealistic, and in a fallen world, it's consequently very unreal and unobtainable. It's not something that we can have, and in some ways it's not something we should have. And this is pure fuel for lust, pure fuel for covetousness. Do you see what I mean? Especially when pride lifts you up to a false sense of height, makes you feel like you can reach things that you can't. And here you are. the very thing which is fueling your pride is also fueling you with things that you want and can covet after. Now this brings me to emulation, which was in Galatians. Emulation. Ambitious or envious rivalry. Ambition or endeavor to equal or excel others. Emulation is basically envy and covetousness actively, in action. The etymology of the word, you can emulate something that is good, but generally emulation, the word emulation is used to denote improper rivalry. That's a good word for it. Rivalry, really. And ambitious, envious rivalry. And when one is in a covetous mindset, remember the media, that's pure fuel for covetousness. The pride sets you up to be covetousness, to be covetous. And this just leads you straight into emulation of evil things, because emulation is active covetousness, it's active lust. In fact, a good verse for this is James 1. Turns to James 1, verse 14 through 15. James 1, 14 through 15. But every man is tempted towards sin, tempted toward something he should not do, something he should not have. Every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust. Lust, covetousness, envy, they're synonyms. Every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed, attracted. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. And sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. When lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. This is what I'm saying to you. The lust, the covetousness, it leads you straight into emulation. Emulating what you should not do. Emulating what people do when they have something you should not have. Rivaling someone because they have something you should not have. In fact, the perfect example of how the media uses covetousness to lead you into emulation would be something like the TV ad industry. Commercials, car commercials. We're all very familiar with them. They're these very, very engaging, and some of them are downright entertaining TV ads which focus thanks Ashton, which are focusing on the latest and the greatest and the most amazing cars there are out there. And what do you think this does to our culture? What do you see in our culture all the time? People buy one car and then they see things like this and all of a sudden, nope, that car's not good enough. We got to get this. We got to get a new car. We got to get a better car. We got to get something fancier. Because they see it and they begin to covet after it, even though it's not something that they really need or something that's way beyond their budget to have. Now, obviously, car ads are not something horrible. Buying a car is not a sin, but this is making my point rather well. What the media did was it incited a lust for something, which consequently incited a desired action. It incited a desired emulation. Through covetousness, the media has achieved its goal of directing a particular portion of your life. So what I've done here, what I've been explaining to you, is the first very important satanic strategy, which is very commonplace in the media that we all enjoy, the common media, the common television. I call it Satan's pride strategy because it starts with pride and it centers on pride. Satan's pride strategy. Step 1, Satan incites pride into you, making you raise yourself to a false area of height. Step 2, consequently, you begin to want things you shouldn't have because you think you are in a position to have them. You think you're in a position to reach these desirables, but in reality you are not. And this is the beginning of covetousness and envy and lust. And then step 3, once you're at the covetous stage, the envious stage, the fuse is primed for the next step, which is emulation. Step 3, emulation. The action on your covetousness, the action on your envy, the action on your lust. And then step 4, once emulations are what you drive for, you are literally living your life for the purpose of pride and envy and covetousness. Living for the purposes of pride and lust. And since this is pride and lust which Satan put into your head, which Satan incited, you're living for the purposes of Satan and not the purposes of God. From pride to covetousness to emulation to satanic control. 4 steps. That's the process of what I call Satan's pride strategy. And the entertainment media is the perfect place for it. It has the pride in utter excess. It has the fuel for covetousness. And once you're there, you're just ready to do exactly what he wants you to do. Now, the pride strategy, as I call it, they can extend to many of the various evils of those 2 references I quoted at first, Galatians and 2 Timothy. Let's look at a few of those. Malignancy, as I would subtitle it, title it really. Malignancy. In Timothy, you had fierce, and in Galatians, you had hatred and wrath and strife and murders. It's the quality of being aggressive, hating, injurious. And that's the polar opposite of our Christian conduct. We're supposed to be peacemakers, not peace breakers. Our salvation was born out of love and not of hate. We are to be a peaceable folk. But the pride, your pride, if you have enough pride, that can lift you above those humbling rules. Because it's humbling to be peaceful. But no, pride can lift you above that. And the media is thick with that idea of, do whatever you have to do to get what you want. Take hatred and wrath. These are very commonplace in the media that we entertain ourselves with, especially as concerns that revenge theme of movies. We see it all the time. The hero was wronged, and he lives his life now eaten up in hate and wrath as he seeks vengeance upon his foes. Living his life eaten up in inordinate hate, seeking vengeance his whole life. But no, vengeance belongs to God in Deuteronomy 32:35. I'll give you the verse that says it. Deuteronomy 32:35. Deuteronomy 32:35. This is God speaking. To me belongeth vengeance and recompense. To God belongeth vengeance. To God belongeth recompense. But what is this that we're presented with in the media? These people in their pride and in their hate, they're constantly seeking vengeance upon their foes, eaten up with that for their whole life. Now note, of course, there is place for proper wrath, and there is place for proper vengeance. But what I'm centering on is this common theme of somebody that lives their life eaten up in that. Lives their life for the sole purpose of hate. That's not what we're supposed to be. And pride lifts you up to that position. And that can be relayed. This sort of attitude, it can be relayed to the audience. Look at our culture today and ask yourself one question. Are people fierce? Do people hate? Are people injurious? What's been happening lately? What about all these riots that we've been seeing? all of this destruction. Why is that? Because of people's pride. Don't tread on me or I'll blow your guts out. That's what we're facing. And I think the media, the way people react to it, the type of media that people use, the type that is very commonplace in our culture, I think that has put a large influence on what we see today. Idolatry. That's in Galatians. Pride factors into idolatry. In fact, excuse me, the media itself, the pride of the media, the pride which is intrinsic, and the pride which infiltrates the media itself, puffs the media, puffs our entertainment up to such heights that we begin to, our culture does not fall short of idolizing our own entertainment and idolizing our media, especially in the area of like human idolatry. The media is always putting forth the actors and the athletes as the most ultimate human beings. It makes me think of the Greek culture with Heracles and Perseus and Jason and Theseus. All of these people that they idolized, they made gods out of them. And here we are, our culture. It literally idolizes these celebrities. I mean, American Idol, hello. We look up to them. We mimic them. We ooh and all over them. We follow their every move on social media. We fall in love with them. And even we go to the extent of hanging their pictures, or dare I say, their images, upon our walls, so that way we can spend our days gazing upon their wonder and majesty. And I don't think I'm over-exaggerating that. That's the sad truth of our culture. This is what we do. Oh, and then witchcraft. That's in Galatians. The pride strategy factors into this very interestingly. First, let's understand something about witchcraft and magic. The first thing to understand whenever you're dealing with this is, number one, God is the sole creator and the sole annihilator of the universe. He is the only one who can completely create, utterly create anything, and the only one who can completely annihilate anything. We here, anything that was created, any beings other than God, all we can do is sort of rearrange the pieces. We can reconstruct, we can assemble, we can disassemble. But we can't actually create. We're all bound under physical laws of the universe which God put upon us. That's part of our finiteness. We're not infinite, and we don't have sovereign power. So what magic is, whenever you see a being, a person, a devil, a demon, whatever, performing magic, what it is just it can only factor down into some sort of high technology, some sort of fancy science which we don't understand, but they do, and they can use it, and they can use it to make themselves look powerful. But they don't have sovereign power over the universe. But when they perform that magic, they like to act as though they do. They like to act as though they have some sort of sovereign power. Magic, witchcraft, it's not understood. It's something that we don't understand. And it's not always our place to understand it. It's not always our place to understand it. The ancient Israelites, it was not their place at that time to understand how an iPhone worked. And if you had shown them an iPhone, they would have probably killed you, because they were not supposed to suffer a witch to live. They would have seen it as magic. And looking back in the course of history, if that had happened back then, it probably would have been some sort of satanic magic. It's not always our place to understand magic and witchcraft, but since we are curious and rational beings, magic is very, very intriguing. We wish we could know what it is. We wish we could understand it, especially We wish we could have the power that it gives us. And this is very special attraction, and Satan is fully aware of it, and he can use it to his full advantage. And this is very, very dangerous, because Satan, he knows a lot about science. He was the highest created being. He was second only to God. He knows a lot about fancy technology, fancy doodads, which to us look like magic, because we don't understand it. We can't comprehend what's going on, but he can. It's sort of like the magical fishing bait to draw humanity in after him. And pride, it can make us reach higher than our understanding allows. We allow ourselves to get proud enough, and we can begin to lust after the power of magic. And we can begin to try to reach farther than we should, and we can begin to try to understand things which we are not able to understand. We can covet the power of magic, and in doing so, we're just one step away from emulating magic. Emulating something that Satan understands, but we don't. Emulating something that he can comprehend very easily, but we can't. And in doing so, we're just putting ourselves at the mercy of Satan if you delve into magic. Now, magic. Do you think there might be some magic in the media? Do you think there might be magic in Disney? Name for me, right off the top of your head, a Disney movie that doesn't have magic. An adventure movie that doesn't have a curse or a spell. It's rampant. This is because it's extremely attractive. And it's very dangerous. Because in our pride, we could begin to emulate what Satan understands and put ourselves at his mercy. This is the sort of stuff that is in the movies and the television and the gaming that we all watch. But then, excuse me, there's another part of witchcraft which is very interesting. And it infiltrates what we see in the media, what we entertain ourselves with. Turn to Isaiah 8, verse 19. Isaiah 8, verse 19. Isaiah 8, verse 19. And when they say unto you, seek unto them that have familiar spirits, necromancers, people that engage with devils, familiar spirits, and unto wizards that peep and that mutter. Wizards that mutter. Mutter, to utter sounds or words indistinctly or with a low voice. To utter especially in a low or imperfectly articulated manner. That low voice. This is something we're faced with a lot in action movies. Characters that have superpowers, magical abilities, they talk in that affected speech. Even characters who don't have magical powers still talk in deep, grave, gravelly, resonant voices. It adds depth and gravity. And it adds awe and power to their persona, especially when they talk about fate and destiny and magic and prophecy. You're laughing because you know what I mean. It adds intrigue, and it adds mystery, and it adds power, and commands respect. It enhances their persona. Do you see what I mean? Is my point made? Gandalf would not be the same if he did not mutter. You know that. It adds power to their character. But what has Satan done here? He's taken the customs of wizards. Now I'm in an English accent. Oh no. That's not good. I am my grandfather's grandson. He is taking the customs of wizards, and he's made it the hallmark of the heroes that we admire. The customs, the trademark of those who are willingly subjugating themselves to Satan, that becomes what we associate our heroes with. Is that scary? Is that revealing? Pride strategy. It can extend to many things. It can extend to really any of the bits and pieces of Galatians, those Galatians and Timothy references that I took. But I'm just going to apply it to those because I have a lot more to go through. Okay. No, this is bad. This is very bad. Okay, we're going to move on. I hope I can get through this. I really want to get through this whole thing. So you might just have to stick with me and endure 15 or 20 extra minutes. The next section, very important section, very important point I have to make here. Sexual immorality, adultery, fornication, those are in Galatians, and then without natural affection, and lasciviousness means wanton and lewd and lustful. That's in Galatians, and without natural affection, that's in Timothy. Before I get into the actual sexual immorality, I need to give you a crash course on marriage. Turn to Ephesians 5:23. Ephesians 5:23. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Christ has a marital relationship with our church, with the church of his elect. The elect of God relate to him as a part of a four-part eternal bond. The elect body is married to Jesus Christ, which is bound in the love and the covenant of the Holy Ghost, and it is authorized and witnessed by God the Father. This marriage is the most important core component of our religion. Without it, there would have been no creation, there would have been no resurrection, we would not even be here. I actually did a good-sized Bible study on what I call the marriage of God and men. If you want more details on it, you can go listen to that, because I got to really scoot past this. Turn to, further down in the same chapter, verses 30 through 31 of Ephesians 5. For we are members of his body, of his flesh and of his bones. That's describing our marital relationship with Jesus. For this cause shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. Our marriages betwixt humans are structured the way they are because God ordained them to be the specific and special representation of the way he relates with his church, with his elect men. That means our marriages are the most direct emblem and representation of the most important core precept of our religion. Now, sexual immorality, fornication, adultery, sodomy, pedophilia, boreality. Boreality is my own word. It's derived from the term boreal, which means pertaining to trees. And yes, there was a man that married his tree. So then, as far as I can tell, he committed boreality, bestiality. That's any sexual relationship which is outside of a proper marriage covenant. It utterly debauches, it utterly debases and denies proper marriage. Consequently, sexual immorality debauches and debases the most important representation of the most central precept of our religion. And then furthermore, add to this that the fact that sexual intercourse is the most physically gratifying, the most mentally gratifying act that humans engage in. Put all that together and you realize that that is Satan's most important and most effective tool he can use upon general mankind in order to keep them away from God. Sexual immorality. Look at what he did with all of those empires that he tried to build. What glued those empires together? It was fertility cult religion. Now, we're all aware there's sex in media. We all know there's sex and innuendos and nudity and crap like that. But I'm not focusing on that. This is stuff that we ought not be watching. But no, I'm going to focus on something that we do watch, and it's way deeper and way scarier and far harder to avoid than any sex scenes. First, let's define what sexual conduct is. In a nutshell, sexual relationship involves lustful perception of another's nakedness. Sex is not constrained to what I will discreetly call baby making. No. Any perception, an unwarranted perception of another's nakedness, the nakedness of the other sex, that counts as sex, sexual relationship. You want a verse for it? I can give you many verses for it in the same chapter. Leviticus 18. Leviticus 18, this is where God was delineating all of the laws regarding the sexual trespasses of the heathen. I'll just start in verse 12. I'm just going to start reading. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy father's sister. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy mother's sister. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy father's brother. And it goes on and on many times in the chapter. Note what this is saying. It does not say, thou shalt not impregnate. No, it says, thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of. The point here, the major point you need to understand is the unwarranted sight of another's nakedness is sufficient to count as a sexual sin. This is why we must wear proper clothing. Because if we did not, if we dressed immodestly, it would distill to nothing but fornicating and adulterating with one another. Now, this is where it gets a lot rougher. In the course of TV and music history, the vast majority of female performers have at one time or another performed in the sight of the audience while dressed immodestly. And no one ought to be stupid enough to contest that point with me. I can hardly think of any actresses that I know of that have not dressed immodestly in front of the audience. As an example, I saw a study across United Kingdom actors and actresses. The actresses, 60% of them were willing to be nude in front of a camera. And I think this was full nudity. This didn't count immodest clothing, low-cut necklines, revealed thighs. No, this was full nudity. I'd like to see the same kind of study done according to biblical standards. 99%, 98%, right? What we realize is that whenever an actress or a singer or a showgirl reveals her nakedness, even if only in part, she is trying to and running the risk of engaging in sex with her audience. And the same goes for men. The same does go for men. In fact, as a matter of interest, the same study showed that 79% of men United Kingdom actors were willing to be nude. 79%. Incredible, right? Scary? It better be. Is this what we think of when we see immodest performers? It's what we ought to think of, because we as Christians ought to know what we're looking at. Does it occur to us that when we are watching and being presented with immodest performers, it boils down to nothing but sexual intercourse? For our own sakes, I hope this is not new information. I hope this is something that we all think of whenever we see this sort of thing. Oh, but it gets better. Or worse, I should say. It gets way worse. Take female performers again. What is something very commonly known about celebrities? Actors, actresses. They are paid very high sums of money for what they do. We see thusly that any female performer, any performer really, but I'm hammering down on the girls because they do it most, and there's reason for that. We see thusly that any female performer who reveals her nakedness to the audience is nothing but a whore and a strumpet by definition. Whore, the definition of a whore, a woman who practices promiscuous sexual intercourse, especially for hire. Which means that female performers, they are undoubtedly the most frequently used whores we've ever seen. Used sexually by sight, by millions, no, billions of men, multitudinous times. It's quiet in here. Am I striking a nerve? Can I see heads nodding? Thank you. Oh, but Justin, can you prove that performers are paid with with the intention of sexual intercourse? Are they really paid for that intention? Number one, I ought not have to prove something that sticks out like a sore thumb, but I will if you want me to. A good example of this is I've always found watching behind-the-scenes featurettes and behind-the-scenes documentation really enjoyable, because I always like to see how they make movies, what goes on behind the scenes. But too much of that just makes me sick because of the stupid things that go on behind the scenes. For instance, perfect example, teenage and young adult actresses whose figures are not satisfactorily developed yet are often equipped with padding on their breasts so as to, as one actress said of herself, make it look, quote, like there's something there, unquote. There's your proof. And even if humans were completely ignorant of what they were doing, believe me, Satan knows what he's doing with this. Satan's behind this, and he knows very well what he's doing. He has intentions. And we all know what God thinks of whores. Turn to Ezekiel 16, 38 through 41. Ezekiel 16. Ezekiel 16, 38 through 41. Speaking of Jerusalem, when she played the harlot. And I will judge thee as women that break wedlock and shed blood are judged. And I will give thee blood in fury and jealousy. And I will also give thee into their hand, and they shall throw down thine eminent place, and shall break down thy high places. They shall strip thee also of thy clothes, and shall take thy fair jewels, and leave thee naked and bare. They shall also bring up a company against thee, and they shall stone thee with stones, and thrust thee through with swords. And they shall burn thine houses with fire, and execute judgments upon thee in the sight of many women. And I will cause thee to cease from playing the harlot, and thou shalt give no hire any more. That's serious, isn't it? Sounds rather nasty. Ezekiel 23. Ezekiel 23, verse 35. Speaking of the same Jerusalem. And in verse 35, verse 35. Therefore thus saith the Lord God, because thou hast forgotten me, and cast me behind thine back, therefore bear thou also thy lewdness and thy whoredoms. Whores bear what they do. Actresses will bear their whoredoms to the judgment day of God, where I think many of them will feel way less cool and way more hot than they ever did before. Puns intended. And you know what I mean by that. And it does not stop with the female, because men do it too. Actors do it too, and they're just as guilty. In fact, actors take it in a different direction, really. They portray themselves as the ultimate men, you know, the most dashing, the strongest, the most smoldering men of all time, so that wherever they go, they're followed by the most disgusting and ill-mannered female squeals and screams as women of all ages swoon at the thought of such men. Just watch a movie premiere, watch the actors walk down that red carpet, and listen to the disgusting sounds that you hear. And then the immorality of the men is taken even further, because they're often portrayed as that sort of playboy type. Whoremongers. I think the playboy is an all too constant character that we watch and laugh at his antics. I'm sure I've laughed at their antics. So remember, the next time you watch a movie with indecently clad performers, a music show where the celebrities, the musicians are indecently clad, those are whores you're looking at. And by seeing them, you are doing exactly what the filmmakers or the directors wanted you to do, to use them sexually by sight. I don't care if you look away from their scanty clothes, which is something we have to do, yes. But it doesn't take away from the danger of it. We have to understand what we're looking at, what we're being presented with, rather, because we ought not look at it. We need to combat it accordingly. And entertainment, it's unlike other forms of temptation, because entertainment, you can control it. For movies, you can find a site on the internet where you can find, the parents' rating. You can find all of the various bits and pieces of smut that are all throughout the movie. You can fast forward through a dirty scene. Our family, we like to use the freeze button. You can find, I think most television remotes have it. You can press freeze or something like that. Something like freeze or pause. It wouldn't be pause, no. Ours is called freeze, and you can freeze the picture of the movie, and yet the movie continues to play. So you can hear the movie, you can hear the plot of the movie going along, but you can freeze it on a modest scene. That way you don't have to watch some crap. And then, once the crappy scene is past, you can start watching the movie again, and you haven't missed any of the plot. That's what we like to do. I suggest trying to figure out how your television might be able to do that, because it's a much better way to get past smut. We can control this temptation. We can control entertainment. We can physically turn off dirty music. So remember, also, it's important to remember that what I'm talking about here, I'm not talking about striptease pornography. No. I'm talking about stuff that we all watch. How many movies did we watch recently which had actresses, buxom actresses, showing off their grandiose canyons? How many movies recently? Let's be very cautious of the way in which we allow prostitutes to virtually enter our homes and give us an hour and a half of entertainment. Are we beginning to see the media from a different perspective? Do things look different than they did before? If they do, I'm achieving my purpose. Oh, and then this question can arise. Justin, why do you hammer down so hard on the media? Why do you hammer down so much on our entertainment? Because there's plenty of horrible stuff in the world as well, the real world. That's true. There is. I can't agree with you more. But this is our entertainment I'm talking about, people. Our entertainment. Something that we choose to do. Something which we have control over. Something that we choose to take responsibility for. We have responsibility. We do it, we're responsible for it. We're responsible to be aware of what I'm telling you today, and more, really. There's a lot more I could talk about. Let's put this into perspective. Turn to Hebrews 10. Hebrews 10, we're going to start verse 12. We're going to jump around here a little bit. Jump around in this chapter. I'm just going to start talking because I really am pressed for time. Hebrews 10 verse 12. But this man, which is Christ, but this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, jumping down to verse 14, for by one offering he hath perfected forever them that are sanctified. And then verse 17, and their sins and iniquities will I remember no more. That's God speaking. Jesus died to save us from and put away all of our sins, period. He wanted them completely annihilated and gone. God hated the sight of even one teeny sin so much that He sent His Son to die in payment of this debt. His Son, our Prince, our King, our Priest, died a humbling, humiliating death so that He wouldn't even have to think about sin ever again. And yet, we managed to wade through a chest-deep quagmire of sinful sludge, such as the entertainment media is, for the sake of some damnable entertainment. Might there be an imbalance in priority here in our culture? Let's make sure that we're not guilty of that imbalance. Let's make sure that we're not doing that. Let's make sure we are aware of what we are watching, of what we are enjoying. This is the general stuff. This can apply to the general stuff that we all enjoy. Now, what I've been showing you so far, satanic strategy, the best tool Satan's got for taking humanity away from God, and the fact that I can apply all of those bits and pieces of Galatians and Timothy, of those references, to the media, that alone should be enough to put any self-respecting, God-fearing Christian on his guard. But I want to look at this from another perspective. Something which really is very interesting and very scary, because this is a psychological process of our minds. A psychological process of our minds which Satan can take advantage of. So please pay attention, because this is really important. This is the pastor's favorite part. Considering it's about psychology, I'm not surprised. We as humans are constantly faced with instances about which we must make decisions. The decisions we make are themselves decided by the way we manifest circumstances to ourselves, the way we process information. To describe this process, I'm going to give you 3 descriptions. The last one will be very easy to understand, but I want to give you 2 rather comprehensive ones. One, I'm going to define what the science of logic calls rhetorical argumentation. When 2 statements are of the same order, but one is more familiar than the other, the more familiar one can be used as an example to manifest the other one. That's a quote from Logic, The Art of Defining and Reasoning. A very, very comprehensive logic book. In a more practical sense, we can look at it this way. When dealing with a new, non-understood circumstance about which one must make a decision, one must first manifest or define the circumstance to oneself so that one understands how to make a decision. To define a circumstance, one automatically reaches into one's most familiar experience related to the circumstance and concludes in accordance with that familiar experience what one's decision should be. And then, in very simple terms, we make decisions in accordance with what we are most familiar with. This is the literal process of our minds. It's the way we work. It's the way God made our minds think. There's nothing we can do about it. God made it that way. And we must always have the Word of God and its standards of morality and character foremost in our hearts, familiarmost in our hearts. Turn to Proverbs 3, 3 through 4. Proverbs 3, 3 through 4. Proverbs 3, 3 through 4. Just a moment. Okay. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Truth. The Word of God is truth. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them upon thy neck. Write them upon the table of thine heart. Keep them close to you. Write them upon your very heart, upon your very soul. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and men. Good understanding. So shalt thou, by writing this on your heart, keeping it close and familiar, that's how you understand. Psalms 119, 104. Psalms 119, 104. Psalms 119, 104. Through thy precepts I get understanding. You put these two together, and these two verses together, and what you realize is we need to be most familiar with the truth of God, the mercy of God, the law of God, because it's through that that we understand. It's through that we can understand how to live our life. It's through that we can understand how to live with godly conduct. And we have to keep it familiar, because that's how our minds work. That's our psychological process through life. And this is the frightening danger of the media, because it is so sodden with sin. The potential effect it can have on us of familiarization with sin is extremely great. Remember the pride strategy? You get too familiar with the pride of the media. You begin to enjoy it and admire it too much. And you'll get so familiar with it that you will fall psychologically, literally, into Satan's trap. In Galatians, it mentions seditions. This one's interesting. Think of the sedition of pastoral authority. Think of, what do you see pastors as in the media? They're just namby-pamby, niggling, mealy-mouthed, drunken panty-waists. They command no respect. Those type of people are worth no respect. And the media puts that type in the position of a bishop. Why do you think that might be? Do you think Satan might want us to become so familiar with these panty-waists, these brown-nosing nigglers, that we lose our respect for what authority and respect the office of a bishop ought to have? Do you see what I mean? We get so familiar with these sots that we see as preachers, these preacher boys, that all preachers look that way now, because that's what we're most familiar with. And then this one's very interesting. Disobedient to parents, children. Children's minds are very malleable. They're very, what's the word? Impressionable. No, that's not what I was looking for. Just a moment. Vulnerable. They're very vulnerable to something like this because they are so impressionable. They're so malleable. Foolishness is bound in the heart of the child. Children are very familiar with foolishness, and the media, as I've been showing you, it is sodden with foolishness. It corresponds directly with what children have bound on their heart. And we have to make sure that our children have strict guidelines to how they relate to media and the foolishness of media, because if we're not careful, our children will begin to live accordingly. Kids have a head start in the area. Foolishness is bound on their heart. The media, it can be that cave, the resort they can go to. Sort of a hiding place where they can sit there and indulge what is fun. A hiding place from the rigors of becoming mature. And that's dangerous. Think of the stupid, disrespectful public school kids we see nowadays. Look at the way they idolize their entertainment. Do you think that entertainment might be having an adverse effect upon them psychologically? I think so. I certainly think so. And then in Timothy, it mentioned lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. That basically showcased what Satan's doing here. You love what you are familiar with. You are most familiar with what you love the most. And he wants us to love pleasure. He wants us to be more familiar with pleasure. He wants us to live in accordance with pleasure and sin and his own ideas more than we love God, and more than we are familiar with God, and more than we are living in accordance with God's precepts. But then, even in the face of this type of danger, a very common answer can pop up in someone's head. I realize that I'm facing a lot of danger, but I'm a strong enough Christian that I can withstand it. Always be wary of the time that you begin to think you are a strong enough Christian that you can withstand temptation. Hebrews 12:29, it says, "Let us have grace whereby we serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear." It is through the grace of God, it is by the grace and the strength of God that we can lift the shield of faith to quench Satan's fiery darts. That's not our strength. That's the strength of God working through us. We must never take that for granted. We must never take for granted the grace and strength of God by owning what strength we have as our own. It's not. What ability we have to withstand temptation, whether it's in the media or elsewhere, that comes from God and God alone. And in the application of entertainment. Taking the grace of God for granted for the sake of entertainment? Do you think a jealous God looks favorably upon that? No, I don't think so. If your entertainment makes you take for granted the grace and strength of God, I'd say it has too much hold in your mind. You must keep it foremost and familiar in your mind that you are a Christian by the grace of God. And as long as you do that, as long as you're familiar with that precept, you won't be so quick to tempt God's grace for the sake of fun and games. Remember, our brains literally work so that we live in accordance with what we are most familiar. And as our brains are cursed with a bent toward evil, that's our curse, we have responsibility to watch ourselves, to understand, to constantly have God's book bound on our heart, familiar, diligently seeking through it, so that way we don't automatically, psychologically fall into Satan's trap. Psalms 119, verse 4. Psalms 119, verse 4. Thou hast commanded us to keep thy precepts diligently. Keep thy precepts diligently. Keep the precepts through which you get understanding. Otherwise you will fall mentally and psychologically. Now, let me give you an example of how this sort of thing could work. I don't think it's any more frightening than in the area of morality and modesty. For instance, if we allow ourselves to get sufficiently familiar with the immodest dress of the media, it will begin to infiltrate our own decisions about clothing. And remember, immodest clothing, that's super dangerous, because the primary definition of sex involves perception of nakedness, unwarranted perception of nakedness, unnecessary perception of the nakedness of the other sex. So when one knowingly wears immodest clothing, one is actually just inviting anybody to have fornication, anybody to adulterate with you, with oneself. This is why our pastor puts rather strict guidelines on our church as far as modesty is concerned, modest clothing, especially when we're gathered together as an assembly. Because he does not want us fornicating and adulterating with one another. In fact, this is an interesting point. Fornication and adultery during religious service. What does this make me think of? Let me squint my eyes and scratch my head. Oh yeah, fertility cult religion. The whore that rides the beast. The stuff that Satan glues his empires together with. The most important strategy Satan has of all. That's why our pastor keeps us modest when we're assembling together. I'd say he has pretty good reason. I think we can understand more fully now why I chose Satanic Boot Camp as the subtitle for my message today. The entertainment media is the ultimate and perfect training ground of Satan's final empire, of satanic propaganda, because Satan can take advantage of the way our minds work and use that to further his campaign. That's dangerous and scary. Okay, I'm almost done. I want to make one more point. I want to put this into perspective of us as a church body. The way we can apply this to ourselves. Let me give you an example of what happened to a church that allowed itself to let its hold on God's precepts slip. Turn to Revelation 2, 4 through 5. Revelation 2, 4 through 5. This is Jesus speaking to the church of Ephesus. Nevertheless, I have somewhat against thee, because thou hast left thy first love. You love what is most familiar with you. You live in accordance with what you love. Remember therefore from whence thou art fallen, and repent, and do the first works. Or else I will come unto thee quickly, and will remove thy candlestick out of his place, except thou repent. The church of Ephesus was not familiar with God as they should have been. And God was telling them that I will remove your church, break down your church, because their candlestick represented their church. The candlestick represented their church. And he's going to take that away from them if they don't get familiar with him as they ought to. That ought to scare us. Especially right now, right? What's happened? What's happened due to the pestilence of COVID-19? 13% of our resident members have been estranged from us. 13% have been taken out of their place here in the assembly. They haven't been able to fill the places that they usually fill. We finally ended up having a communion service without them. But that was not a full communion service, because there were some places that were empty. Why does Jesus do this? Because Jesus is in control of that bridge. He can bring them across in a flash. Is he just trying us? Trying our faith? Testing us? If that's the case, I pray to God that's only the case. Because it's the sort of thing which we just have to show him our stamina, show him our faith. Show him that we can take what he gives us. And then pray and hope that he ends the trial. But let's take this to worst case scenario. Let's make sure that he's not rebuking us. Let's make sure that he's not rebuking us for leaving our first love. Whatever distractions it might be, let us make sure that he is not rebuking us for that. Especially if it's something like the entertainment media. As I've shown you, it's so sodden with satanic propaganda, so sodden with sin. It's very dangerous because we can get very familiar with it very fast and then live in accordance with it. And there's nothing we can do about that because that's how we work mentally. Once you've passed that point, once you're sufficiently familiar with something, you psychologically live in accordance with it. That's the way you work. Let's make sure that we're not attending satanic boot camp more than we should attend biblical boot camp. I've covered a lot of ground today, I think. I've given you a lot to think of. A lot to think on. And I actually got done a little bit faster than I thought I would. That's pretty good. Brendan, how long have I been up here?
1:17.
Okay, that's better than I thought. I was expecting this would be a full hour and a half. You can take what I've given you today, and you can apply it to your lives, and I personally don't care how you apply what I've told you to your lives, as long as you apply it in a way that is fit according to God's standards. But I'm going to leave you with one last verse, and then I'll be done. Ephesians 5, verse 15. Last verse, you can think on this. Ephesians 5, verse 15. See then that ye walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise. I'm done.